Hey, Book Dragons. It is your girl, Lindsay from the Spine Bookshop. Thank you so much for turning into another episode of the Spine Bookcast, Chronicles of a Bookshop. Today, we have Dietrich Stogner, who wrote Frostbitten. And when I tell you that when we read it for our book club, I told him that it reminded me of Game of Thrones meets a frozen version of Walking Dead. And that's how I pitch it to people. And then you look at the cover and it's just beautiful, but you're changing the cover. So
we've got a second cover. The original cover is going to remain the same on most of the distribution. But yeah, we have a
awesome
deluxe edition coming out that's got a slightly different cover, which I'm a big fan of. So.
Gotcha. So, well, let's get into it. What got you into reading?
I've read ever since I was pretty young. I picked it up. My mom read to me a lot when I was a kid, which I think is super important. And encouraged me to read quite a bit. And my parents were great. They had a rule that that we didn't watch a lot of TV. We didn't have video games. We didn't have that. But anything I wanted to read, they were fine with. They made sure I had library cards. They made sure I had access to books. So I did that a lot growing up. Reading's always just been a big part of my upbringing and has always been a big part of my life. So
I hear that from a lot of you guys about the library. And the library was big for me too. But like every single writer that I've talked to, the library is a consistent theme of y'all growing up.
So my dad was Army. We moved a lot growing up. And so the library was pretty much one of the constants that I could kind of go to and hang out at and know that I was felt welcome at and all that. And then especially we moved to Logan, Utah when I was 11. And there was a small library in Logan, Utah, the Logan Public Library that I think every writer has like those weird dreams if they ever become successful. One of the weird dreams that I've got is they've got names of authors painted on the border up at the top.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, getting added to the Logan Public Library would be a big accomplishment for me because that place was foundational for me, I think.
I think that's so cool. And I mean, I grew up going to the library too. And I always, every time I see somebody start attacking the library, and I'm like, no.
Yeah. We
need libraries.
They're crucial.
Yes, absolutely. So what was that favorite book of yours as a kid?
So there were a couple that I think really kind of anchored with me. Some that my opinion has changed as I've gotten older. But, I remember when I was 10, we went to the dentist and I was reading something. I don't remember what. And the dentist himself actually started talking to me about reading. And he gave me a copy of Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. So good. Which was one of the first books that I really, really became fascinated with, like how the author had done what they'd done. And then I've talked before, when I was 12, my dad was reading a book and I asked what it was about. He said it was about a demonically possessed car that was murdering people. And when I asked more, he's like, well, you're too young to read that, which, anyone who has kids knows that's the quickest way to make sure that they absolutely do read it.
Sure.
So I stole his copy and stayed up till 2 a.m. reading Christine by Stephen King. And that was my first Stephen King book, and he's a foundational author for me.
You and Lloyd both. Yeah. Like, Stephen King is your guy.
Yeah. But second, it was the first time that I actually realized, somebody got paid money to tell stories like this, and I thought that was pretty incredible. It was the first time I ever had the thought that I wanted to be a writer.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So do you find that because you brought it up kind of where it's changed for you, so when you read a book as a young kid and then you go back and reread it when you get older, has it changed? Have you gotten something new from that book that you didn't get before?
Yeah, I mean, I think it changes due to a couple different factors. I mean, for a lot of reasons, my thoughts about Ender's Game have changed due to the author. But with Stephen King, I think his books are, they're grounded in pulp, but he's got a huge amount of symbolism that he weaves through there, whether he intends to or not. I mean, the man's famously a pantser, and yet he still manages to do a lot like that. But yeah, there are quite a few books that I think, depending on the time of your life that you read them, your impression of them changes pretty dramatically. I've talked before about To Kill a Mockingbird, which I think all of us read. Too. Yeah, all of us read in high school or middle school as assigned reading. And, when you read that book the first time and you hear that Tom Robinson was killed trying to escape, as a kid, you're like, oh, he tried to escape. And as an adult, you realize, no, the book's telling you something very different.
Yeah.
And I think the experiences we have in life and the way we kind of start to learn more about the world and how these stories relate to that world, they do definitely change the way we look at those books.
Yeah. So. That's funny you say that, because I remember reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and I remember being instantly furious that Tom died.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I didn't understand why I was so mad, but I just knew it wasn't fair.
Yeah.
And then, I've reread it, probably 4 or 5 times at different times in my life. And each time I just get madder at the injustice of it all.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But I also really love the scene in the court when it's all over, he's been found guilty, and Scout and Jim are sitting upstairs with where all the African American people are, and they all stand up, and he tells her to stand up because her father is passing.
Yep.
I just goosebumps. And then to see it in a movie with Gregory Peck.
Oh yeah, the movie's fantastic.
It's like one of those, like, it's canon. You cannot ever remake that movie ever. I'll die on that throne. But yeah, I love how you can read a book and read it at this age and you get this from it, and read it in this age and get this from it. The Stand for Stephen King was like that for me.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because it's totally hit me so many different ways.
Yeah. Well, The Stand is raw symbolism throughout. I think aside from the Dark Tower books, those are the ones that he just kind of embraced symbolism and theme in a way that he, he's a very plot driven writer most of the time.
Sure.
So I think it was a little outside his wheelhouse, but it works amazing. So. Oh,
I love both film versions that they've done of it, because they did the TV series. Early 90s. Mm-hmm. And they had a soap star playing Randall Flagg. And I remember there was all this like, wait, what? But then you see him and he is creepy.
Yeah.
And then when they redid it with Skarsgård, and it was a whole different level of menacingly creepy than the first guy. I mean, it was on a different level. But I just thought the casting was excellent. I thought it was really, really good. And I love that Stephen King, and I've said this before, he gives you just enough to kick your imagination off.
Yeah.
And then goes, okay, have fun with that, as you go silently insane with all the, what?
Yeah. No, he's very good about not over explaining. I think that's one of the things I like best about him. So.
Yeah, that's what Lloyd has said too.
Yeah.
So what are you into reading right now? I know you're writing, but what are you into reading right now?
So beginning of this year, I kind of had made this pledge to make every other book I read be an indie book. I'm very passionate about supporting other indie authors and pushing their content and kind of getting the word out there about their books. And the funny thing is that so far this year, I've read 72 books, and of those, 51 have been indie.
That's awesome.
And part of it is because I do reviews. I do give feedback to beta readers and stuff like that. But the other side is I've just, one of the things I've really kind of settled into this year is this realization that indie books have less shackles on them. They can kind of go in directions that you don't necessarily expect.
Sure.
And I think after you've read enough books, one of the true gifts that an author can give you is to genuinely surprise you.
Yeah.
Do something you haven't seen before. And that's hard to find nowadays. So
you should read Emily Barlow's book. That is our book club, our local author book club. Because whenever we have a local author book club, like even with yours, I didn't read the back.
Yeah.
Like I read it when I first got it, but it's been filtered through and forgotten. So I just pick it up and start reading. I'm halfway through and I still have no idea where I'm going. And it is fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I've never read anything like what she's writing. And I'm still not sure what's happening. But I am so invested because I know the payoff is going to be great.
Oh, yeah.
And when you read something that really surprises you, it catches you off guard. Like you and I are such ferocious readers that there's a lot of stuff that are tropes.
Yeah.
And to have something that's like, what is happening is fascinating.
Yeah, I think my 3 favorites this year are all indie books. I read a book very early in this year called The Queen is Dead by C.H. Folan, which is a retelling of the life of Lady Macbeth. And it is this just absolutely furious story. It really cycles around the theme of the role that women have played in history and the way that they are often portrayed as the villain.
And what is it called?
It's called The Queen is Dead.
Okay.
By C.H. Follin. It's a tremendous book. Absolutely loved it. And then there are two books that have not come out yet that I was fortunate enough to beta read and got a early look at them that I legitimately think are going to catch fire. One is called Riftbringer by Adrienne Rennick. Who is already had kind of established herself as one of the most gifted sci-fi indie authors that I've read.
Okay.
Her first book, Corrosion, was astonishing, and then I got Riftbringer, and it's a quantum leap forward in every way. It's ambitious, it's rich, it's complex, it's absolutely amazing and blew me away. But probably my biggest surprise this year is on December 3rd, a book is released by an author, Kate Page, called Funny Girl.
Okay.
And I read a fairly broad range of genres, but romance is one that I just really haven't spent much time in. I read her first book, which is a superhero romance called Poorly Wired Circuit, which is a lot of fun. But again, romance just isn't my genre. Funny Girl is without question the best thing I've read this year. It is a 5-day character study between these two individuals who are absolutely deeply broken in their relationship, and it is one of the most complex and fascinating character interactions I've ever seen put to paper.
Sure.
It's astonishing work, and yeah, I have a very strong sense Kate Page is going to be a household name in a few years.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
So last week we talked to Ann Harris, and she's our August author of the month.
Okay.
And so we challenged each other. So I read Court of Thorns and Roses, and I realize it's tropey, but I'm obsessed with that series.
Sure.
And she's obsessed with the Fourth Wing series. And so she got Court of Thorns and Roses, and I opened up my Fourth Wing, and we challenged each other to read each other's favorite books. And there was a line, it's rare, you know, when I read a funny book and it's funny, you kind of go, huh, that's funny, you know. And it's funny, but you don't really have a big reaction.
Yeah.
So there's a line in Fourth Wing where, you know, the girl meets her dragon and she falls off and he grabs her and throws her back on there and says, could you please stop embarrassing us? You're making us look bad.
Yeah.
And I just, this relationship between the dragon and the girl, and that's the first thing, you know, was just so funny, and it caught me off guard. Yeah. And so here's this curmudgeon-y dragon. Could you stop making us look bad?
Yeah.
And so I really love when you get a book that, you know, okay, it's tropey, but I'm going to read it anyway. I really love it. But then it turns out to be really funny.
Yeah, yeah.
And it catches you off guard that it's funny.
Yeah. Humor is tough to do in books. It's one of the hardest things to do, I think. So.
Julie and Julia is another book that made me laugh till I cried.
Oh, yeah. My wife loves that book. So.
The whole scene where she's trying to get the marrow out of the calf bone and there's blood everywhere, and her husband walks in and she does, you know, it puts the lotion on its skin until it gets the hosing. I started laughing till I was sobbing and could not breathe. Because I can see it.
Yeah.
I can see this whole, and it just, I think humor in books is really vastly underrated.
It can be, yeah. Yeah.
Especially if it's done right.
Yes. I think that's the problem. I think a lot of people take a swing at that, but they don't necessarily land it. It's very difficult to create something that's legitimately funny across a wide audience, because humor, for the most part, is a very personal experience. So, yeah, it's always a challenge, but. Yeah.
It's the same thing with like movies, and you know, there are some movies that are so flippin' stupid and absolutely hilarious, and they make me laugh every time I watch it, even when I know it's coming.
Yeah. And
so then you get these Academy Awards and it's all drama. I have yet to see a comedy, like a good, just dying comedy, win a whole bunch of awards. And I think that's such an undervalued, or maybe not undervalued, but it's a missed opportunity.
Sure, yeah.
You know, like The Birdcage with Robin Williams, that should have won all kinds of awards. I've watched that movie 15 billion times, and every time it just makes me laugh. And even the Jay and Silent Bob movies, how those are not winning some awards, because it is... Kevin Smith is one of the most talented, funny screenwriters I've ever seen in my life. And every single movie that he makes, I don't care what it's about, I'll go watch it. Do you have any authors or screenwriters that, like, if they write something, it doesn't matter, you're going?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've talked about King, of course. Terry Pratchett was that way for a long time before he passed. Terry Pratchett, I think, is one of the few authors that managed to capture humor in like almost a perfect way. I think his books were fairly astonishing. And yeah, there are several others. There's a new horror author, relatively new. His books have been out for about 10 years, but he's new to the States, called Thomas Holt Huvelt. He wrote a book called Hex that was released in the U.S. and got.
I've seen that book.
Yeah,
it's on my list.
It's terrific. It's this very, very black horror, but it does have some oddly funny elements to it that I really, really love. N.K. Jemisin, I love her stuff. I mean, she is, I think.
What's the series? It's the 3-part, it's the 3 books.
Broken Earth.
Yes, yeah. I read that.
I think N.K. Jemisin is one of probably the most gifted authors on the planet right now. I think she's working on a level that very few other people can even approximate. And then Victor Laval, he wrote The Changeling, which is an astonishing little horror novel.
Is that the one where the book cover has the pram on the front?
I think so. Yeah.
With the tree and all the little weird stuff hanging from it over the... Yeah. That book is weird.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, and it depends. There are some authors I pick up because I know consistently that I'm going to be entertained by what they write. There's a D&D podcast called The Adventure Zone that I absolutely adore. And
I think I've seen that.
Yeah, and they've started doing graphic novel adaptations of their seasons, and I pick those up every time, and they're not perfect. They're not, but they make me laugh every time. And then there are authors that I legitimately just pick up their stuff because I think that they are operating on a level that I can learn something from.
Sure.
And even if, I will argue till the cows come home that Tamsin Muir is one of the most gifted young authors working today.
Okay.
Even if the Gideon the Ninth series, I've struggled to engage with it the way I want to.
Sure.
But the writing in it is on such a different level. It's amazing.
Sure.
So, yeah.
I discovered Allie Brosh and I'm going to forget her name, but the girl who did the comic, but it's a graphic novel of Lore Olympus. Those, I forget graphic novels sometimes, even though I have several of them that I love, but sometimes I forget they're there. And, but so Allie Brosh has depression and all this kind of stuff. And she writes about all of this really dark, hard stuff that she has to go through with this insanely hysterical sense of humor. And her 2 books, I have read them several times and have laughed till I can't breathe. Because if you have any kind of anxiety, depression, anything, to read how she copes with this stuff and the illustrations that she draws with them are the funniest thing I've ever seen in my whole life because it's such a unique take on mental illness.
Yeah.
And then you look at the Lore Olympus where she assigned each Greek god or character a specific color. And then so through the whole thing, it's varying shades of that color and it's a magnificent story.
Yeah.
And I love when you find writers like that you just accidentally run into them and then, okay, I want to read everything they've ever written.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, it's always a joy to find an author and you pick up their first book and you realize that they've got, 9, 10, 20, 40 books out. And you're right at the beginning of discovering someone that you really, really are going to appreciate. And it's going to fundamentally change the way you look at books.
Well, and during COVID, that's how I found Court of Thorns and Roses because during COVID, I didn't, I got laid off and was trying to figure out what I was going to do for a while. And, I was trying to shelter in place and I'm not a stay home person.
Sure.
And I was going out of my ever loving mind. If I had to look at my house one more time, and I was talking about it on TikTok and a friend of mine sent me the first book of the Court of Thorns and Roses. Because I was in this really bad reading slump because I couldn't get out of the house. And so I was like, okay, fine. I read it in one day and then immediately spent like $100 and bought all the rest of the books in the series. And I was like, I'm good. I don't need to do anything. I have a stack of books I'm now going to work with. And then immediately went through the Thorn and Glass series.
Yeah.
And now I'm working on and the thing is, so the Court of Thorns and Roses is fairies, Throne of Glass, fairies and that whole, but then you get into the Crescent City series and it's a whole different kind of thing because she's brought in like fairies and werewolves and vampires and then all these various versions of mixed breeds of stuff all in the city that have to deal with each other, which causes problems, and it's fascinating. And then, you know, I think fantasy and young adult literature has really changed from when we were kids. And now it's so much more open to different variations of those two things together.
Well, and I think a big part of that is the push in the industry to start accepting more diverse authors and start welcoming more voices in. You know, the fantasy's been around since even before Tolkien dropped the rings and all that, but all of the authors looked pretty much exactly the same. You know, you had cis white men that were writing the same kind of Arthurian fantasy, European-inspired fantasy, that kind of thing. And I think one of the joys that we've gotten in the last few years is that we have seen authors that are bringing a different cultural perspective, a different life experience, a different, you know, we have some women fantasy authors who are doing just some unparalleled stuff. Naomi Novak, what's her name? Anne
McCaffrey is one I've gotten into.
Yeah, R.F. Kuang. R.F. Kuang. You have just incredible authors. N.K. Jemisin. I mean, N.K. Jemisin, nobody would have looked at her 30 years ago. Like, nobody would have even mentioned her name. And Martha Wells with what she's doing with the Murderbot series. You know, there's so many authors out there. And I think what it's letting us do is explore different ideas, different perspectives, different cultures. And it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. Show me something new. Like, I don't want to read a book with orcs in it. I don't want to read a book anymore with elves and dwarves. Like, I've seen it. It's been done. But you bring me something unique and vivid that actually has something new that I haven't seen before. Yeah, absolutely. All day long.
Well, and I've said that too about your book and several, that's like when I started the bookshop, and I realized that there were not local authors very present in bookshops. I thought, you know, because everybody kept saying your bookshop has to have a niche, right? And so I spent all day running around to all these bookshops and I would ask, do you have any local authors? I got a couple. And so now I think we're at 70 as last check. And when I tell you that some of my favorite books in the last 2 years, probably all of them, the ones that I've read, every single one has been brilliant. Because it's something I've never read before. Or it's a different take on something where they go, okay, I'm going to do a space series, but let me tweak it. Or I'm going to do fairies and orcs and dwarves and all that kind of stuff, but I'm going to tweak it. Or I'm going to do Game of Thrones, but I'm going to throw some Walking Dead in there, you know? And I really love that, like what you said earlier, you've got all these authors who are now unchained and can just do this we're going to do all of this, and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah. I think we're at a very exciting time, especially for genre fiction. I still think there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done. But I think the fact that authors like Jemisin, authors like R.F. Kuang, authors like Naomi Novak, I think they are laying the groundwork for the next generation of authors that are going to do even more stuff that we haven't seen before. And it's also teaching publishers, at least I hope it's teaching publishers, that the public wants to be surprised. They want to see something that they haven't seen before. And if you can get someone who really has something to say, who really has a gift putting words down on paper and can tell a story that we have not seen before. I mean, Tamsin Muir is a great example of that. I mean, her books are unlike anything that I've ever read before. They're not even close. And they blew up. And they blew up because everyone wanted to get a look at something completely different and see how this author managed to piece together this surreal, gothic, bleak, hysterical science fiction story set in this haunted mansion in space with necromancers. Like, all of it. It's great. And so I think it's an exciting time. I think another thing that's helping is that indie publishing is becoming, in some ways, a lot easier, a lot more approachable for people. In other ways, it's becoming a lot harder. But you know, I think that's like anything else. So
I also really appreciate that the LGBTQ community, authors are getting way more exposure than they used to. And like Netflix is picking up stuff and HBO Max is picking up stuff. And so you have these opportunities to sell stories that we've never seen before, but should be told.
No, I mean, look, I think there are opportunities out there, and that people are looking to try to recreate the success of something that's already been done, are always going to just, at best, they're going to produce a watered down version of that thing.
Sure.
And you're not going to really make any forward progress on that. You've got to take risks.
Right.
You've got to roll the dice on something that maybe you hadn't expected. And sometimes and a lot of times it's not going to work out. Like I said, I've read 51 indie books this year, and I would say about half of them just did not land with
right.
me. But that's okay. The authors take a shot, and just because it didn't work for me doesn't mean that it won't work for somebody else.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I would always rather read an exciting failure than a boring success.
Yeah. When Rutherford County, Murfreesboro specifically, decided that they wanted to ban those 4 LGBTQ books last year, our LGBTQ author book club was like, okay, that's what we're reading.
Yeah.
And all 4 of them, I had no idea what I was getting into. And it was This Book is Gay, Genderqueer, Flamer, and I always forget what the other one is, and I can never remember. But I remember reading Genderqueer, which is about a girl who doesn't really feel like a girl, but doesn't really feel like a boy. And as someone who's an ally, but is still learning what all those terms mean. And you know, This Book is Gay and Genderqueer for me, like, changed my entire thought process, which is what I think books are supposed to do, because you read things and it's just kind of, that's what that means. I understand what that means now. Like, I get it. I didn't know that before. And I really like that books now are you know, we're getting books that make you kind of sit back and, you know, because I like books that challenge my thinking.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, no, I don't know. Like I said, I think it's an exciting time right now. I'm really looking forward to what the next 10, 15 years bring for publishing. I think the large traditional publishers are going to have to start adapting much more quickly, and I think indie publishing is going to see some very, very big names come out of it. So, yeah.
So what are you working on now for your writing? Because I know that when you and I talked about Frostbitten, you said it's going to be like a whole series.
Yes. So we just wrapped the Kickstarter for a deluxe hardcover edition of Frostbitten, which was very successful. I was blown away by the response and incredibly grateful to everybody who backed that. And we just sent out the ebook for all the backers yesterday, so that was very exciting. But as in regards to the series, I actually just wrapped and sent to the editor the second book in the series, which is called Extraction, which is not a direct follow-up to Frostbitten. The first 4 books in the series are going to be anthology style. They're all going to take place in the world about 5 to 6 years apart, with different casts of characters, and part of it is to flesh out the world before book 5, which will be called Resident, and book 5 will begin the rest of the series in a much more traditional fantasy series style, following one primary character as she embarks on a very long journey across that entire continent. So
how many books are going to be in the series total, do you think?
As of last week, it was 8, but I think we've settled on splitting Resident into 2 books. Resident is a very large book right now, and I've had enough people read through it, and finally all agree that there's not a good way to trim it down. So I think we're splitting it into 2, so I think it'll end up being 9 total. Yeah. So
Frostbitten, for those who haven't read it yet, is about this. When I say Game of Thrones, think also kind of Gladiator. A little bit.
A bit. That opening chapter, definitely.
Yeah, and then so they send this guy who wins the challenge. Because I don't want to give too much away.
Sure.
But you know, and he has to go to this area in the country that's literally just a freezer. But these town people live there because it's on a volcano, right? Or
essentially exposed lava river.
Yeah. Which, when I read that, I was trying to think, like, how does people not burn up? But the more that you get into it, it's really interesting how you worked that as it's part of their whole survival.
Yeah. Frostbitten follows a soldier named Thomas Greenleaf who is sent to a small community called Lehane in the Arctic north of his country. He doesn't know why he was sent there. Nobody who lives in Lehane seems to know why he was sent there. And he doesn't want to be there. And neither does anybody else who lives there. Pretty much everybody's in agreement they want Tomas to go. And the only way he can do that is if he figured out why he was sent there in the first place and what the secret at the heart of this community is. I wrote Resonant, like I said, book 5. I wrote that first in the series. And when I was done with it, I knew I wanted to flesh out the world a bit more before I put Resonant out in the world. And so I started thinking a lot about the different countries that occupy this continent that these books will take place on. And I had actually just finished reading John Krakauer's book Into Thin Air, which is one of the iconic nonfiction books of all time. It's astonishing. And Krakauer talking about, at one point, Krakauer talks about the top of Everest, and he says that he feels that if God exists, there could be no better way that he could have illustrated. He did not want us to go up there. Like, it was such an unforgivable and forbidding place. And I started thinking a little bit about how a community would actually thrive. They had to exist in such a place. And so Lehar came from that, and then I came up with the idea of Lehar's connection to the Empire, and the story kind of flowed from there.
I will tell you, I'm not going to spoil it, but that has a kicker in the end. And my poor husband, I was sitting in bed reading, and when you find out holy shit. And my husband's like, it's fine. Go back to sleep. Oh my God. And that was a surprise to me.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when I read stuff like that, because usually, and I think I told you this before, like when I read certain books and I know, okay, this is what's going to happen. Like with Shutter Island, first chapter, I knew exactly how the rest of the book was going to play out. Like, no question. And I always hate when I figure stuff out too early. But yours, I didn't do that. Yeah. And I just appreciate the crap out of that, because it's so original in that the way it sets you up.
Yeah, one of the things I've really started to believe is that fantasy is kind of an excellent base for other genre stories to be inserted within. And I knew I wanted horror to be an element of Frostbitten, and I did my best. Successful. I wanted to incorporate that sense of growing dread and tension. But I really also genuinely believe that the vast majority of genre stories all have mystery at their core. Like, sure. It's always, there's a question that needs to be answered by the end of it. And you and the characters are on this journey together, just trying to piece together answers, piece together a conclusion. And so, this case in Frostbitten is definitely the case in Extraction, which is more of a fantasy heist. And I think at its core, that is what makes stories like this work, is that you go on this emotional and intellectual journey with the characters, and you get to come to these realizations either before them, at the same time as them. It doesn't really matter, because you are both experiencing and act together. And I think when a book can do that, it ends up generally being successful.
Well, I know I told you this, but I'm going to say it again. The scene, the first scene where they have to get into the cave in the very first time, and you get the sense of what's coming, but you don't actually really get to see what it is, that sense of just absolute dread. It reminds me very much of Salem's Lot by Stephen King, where like the kid is scratching on the window, or when the gravedigger's looking at the grave and can just see the kid's eyes through the coffin. It just, that sense of, ooh. I think that you did a very good job. And it very much reminded me of Stephen King in that, because you gave me just enough to go, okay, I gotta go watch cartoons. I can't keep reading this. I'm never going to be able to go to sleep.
One of my, excuse me.
That's okay. The train is coming. We have a train. It's fantastic.
Yeah, you do.
It's awesome. It's very like Whistle Stop Cafe and fried green tomatoes for me.
It's very atmospheric.
I love it. It makes me so freaking happy. But go ahead. You were saying?
One of my favorite movies of all time, its foundation for me, is Jurassic Park.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
And one of my favorite elements of Jurassic Park, beg pardon.
We're in the South, and we have allergies.
Yeah, all of us.
So bad.
Yeah. One of my favorite features of Jurassic Park is everyone remembers the velociraptors and the big threat.
Sure.
You don't actually see them until 18 minutes before the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And I think that technique of holding the reveal and just dropping hints until the right moment, fundamental.
Well, and I think Jurassic Park is also a great version of adding humor into something that's terrifying. So like the scene with Jeff Goldblum where they're on the Jeep and the Tyrannosaurus Rex is running out, must go faster, must go faster. It's one of the funny, every time I watch that movie, it makes me giggle. Because, they are terrified. And here he is, must go faster.
Yeah. But no, yeah, I knew horror was always going to be a part of what I wrote. It's what I grew up with. It's what I love.
Yeah.
And I also think fantasy is an ideal vehicle for horror. I think,
sure.
You are exploring the unknown in a lot of different ways, and in a lot of areas that can be extremely dangerous.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you prefer the type of horror like Hannibal Lecter horror, where it's, you've got an insane person who could actually just go around killing people and it's terrifying the stuff that they do? Or do you prefer the kind of horror like the creature from hell that comes up and it's mythical,
I like both, honestly. I think there's very different approaches, and I will say, Frostbitten very much falls in the latter category. Extraction's going to fall more in the former. Extraction's antagonist is a religious fanatic who, let's say, his practices align much more with the Spanish Inquisition than
right.
people would prefer. I think that I liked Frostbitten because the vast majority of the threats in that came from the natural world. They came from the environment. They came from the creatures. There was no malevolence behind it. It was just simply a reality of this is the world that you are trying to survive in, and it's going to do everything it can to try to kill you.
Sure.
And I think that's much more of a personal encounter. I think that Frostbitten is very much a story of Tomas trying to endure within this environment.
Because it's a very extreme environment that he starts out and then goes to. But I really liked that it reminded me of, is it Call of the Wild, where he's out in the snow and he's trying to survive because of the temperatures. I can't remember what, I think that's it.
The Gray, maybe?
Yeah. The Gray, that's it. Yeah. Yeah,
I did a huge amount of research into the effects of temperatures that cold on the human body. It all sums up to very, very bad, effectively. The title, of course, is Frostbitten, but hypothermia, paradoxical undressing, frostbite, all of these come into play in very real ways in the story because there are places like this. I modeled the environment after an actual place on Earth called the Antarctic Plateau, which is a absolutely 160, 170 degree below zero at night, 90 below zero during the daytime.
Thank you.
Yeah. It is a lethal part of the planet. And so I enjoyed that quite a bit. And then with Extraction, the threat very much is in the guise of an individual. And so I had to play a little bit more about the connection, the justification, the rationalization, like all of these different character elements that I didn't get to explore in Frostbite, and I'm now getting to explore in Extraction.
Yeah.
So.
Have you ever seen the movie Mr. Brooks with Kevin Costner and, what's the guy's name? Hurt? I think not John Hurt, but I'll think of it in a minute. So Kevin Costner is famous for saying he never wanted to play a killer or a villain, right? Okay. Until Mr. Brooks. So Mr. Brooks, Kevin Costner plays the man of just great husband, great father, runs a company. He's a good guy. Everybody loves him, except he's a serial killer.
Sure.
And William Hurt, I think is who it is. William Hurt, who plays the alter ego serial killer version, right? And my whole point in saying this is there is this one scene that is worth watching the whole movie for this one scene. Is they're both sitting in a car and Kevin Costner's in the front seat and Hurt's in the back seat. And when they both turn to look out the back window at Dane Cook, they have the literal exact same expression. And the way they turn is literally synchronized. And it is the creepiest thing I have ever seen in a movie because you're literally, and your brain just knows that is not normal. But I would love to know how hard it was because that one scene is the creepiest scene I've ever seen in my entire life. and just because of the literal same expression. And just the movement and everything is absolutely 100% synchronized to the minor, tiniest detail. And it is one of the creepiest movies that I've ever seen in my life, because it's, I think, very common day in that you have the guy that everybody knows and likes, and then, oh my God, he's a serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love when they do movies and have certain aspects that you're sitting there and watching in your body and in like down to your DNA, just freaks you out.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do.
It is. It can be, yeah. So, no, I have not seen that one.
Oh, you should watch it. It's fantastic. It is by far one of my favorite movies. Do you have a fantasy or horror book that hasn't been made into a movie that you would really like to see made into, or a TV series?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, I think the knee-jerk answer for a lot of people is Sanderson. I am baffled by the fact that nobody's picked up on this guy's work. He's not even my favorite author right now. I like his stuff fine.
Brandon Sanderson?
Brandon Sanderson,
Okay.
yeah. But I'm just amazed. But no, the one of my favorite series of the last 10 years is the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee.
Okay.
Which starts with Jade City, which is this bizarre fusion of urban fantasy, kung fu film, and Godfather type story.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it's set in this fictional Asian island that is effectively, if not in name, in actuality, ruled by these crime families who are powerful because they figured out a way to use jade to give themselves certain abilities.
Okay.
And these books are across the board just absolutely jaw-dropping, incredible. And they, given the right director, given somebody who genuinely loved the material and really, really wanted to embrace the insanity and action of this, I think they'd make an incredible adaptation.
Okay.
So I know it got Peacock bought the rights, but then let go of them after a couple years. So I think
I
it's still
hate
up
when
in
they
there.
do that.
Yeah. You know, it definitely happens, and I'd rather that happen than make a poor adaptation.
Sure.
So.
Oh, I've said that Dan Adams' book, and I think your book too. I think Dan, Adam, your book. And I even think Zoe Bakurin, her book, there's several on the local author bookshelf that I would love to see adapted.
Yeah.
Because they've taken, like for example, Dan's book. It reminds me of The Martian a little bit, the Andy Weir, which I love that movie, and that book is fantastic. But he does what I've said. He takes a really different spin on it. And then, so you're reading it and you just have a lot of this, oh God. And I texted Dan repeatedly, what is wrong with you? Why are you, oh my God. And it just, anything that makes me have that just visceral gut reaction to reading it while I'm reading it, I want to see visually on screen somewhere. Yeah. And so every time I see a remake, I want to point to the shelf. And but,
yeah.
So my whole point in saying that is if you could cast someone in Frostbitten.
Oh God. I've had this conversation. One of the things that we did for the Kickstarter is commissioned character art.
Okay. I love character art.
Art from three incredibly gifted authors. Adrienne Rennick, the author I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
She did a scene, and I've already gotten that one back. And then another two other artists, Taylor Vaughn, who's an amazing author in her own right. I picked author artists for each one. Sure. And then Nicole McKeon. They're all doing amazing stuff. And as I'm getting these versions back, I'm getting their perspective on what these characters look like, and it's been amazing. The funny thing is, I know a lot of authors do face comps. They have these ideas, these actors that they have in the back of their mind.
Sure.
With Frostbitten, I struggled to do that quite a bit. In my mind, I always pictured a very young, much younger Michael B. Jordan as Tomas.
I could see that.
Yeah. But beyond that, I just kind of. I don't know why. That's never been a huge part of the way I kind of create the characters in my head.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I think it'd be amazing. I thought more about who I'd love to see actually do an adaptation. Noah Hawley, I think, would be an amazing pull for that. But yeah, one of the things I'm really excited about, especially with the art and when people read the book, is I love hearing their interpretations. I love hearing who they think they would cast. I love these ideas that they come up with, because I think it's really cool that I got to put the story in someone else's hands, and they have their own ideas about what these characters look like, how they interact, and that kind of thing. And I think that's kind of amazing.
I think that's so funny that you say that about what people think, because I am horrible to go watch a movie with if it's based on a book that I love. And, a couple of my friends who will go with me and tolerate my size and my eye crosses and oh my God. Because usually when I'm reading, and I didn't know that some people do this, I play it out in my head like a film when I'm reading. So to me, this is who I would cast. This is what this character looks like. And for me, it's canon. This is what they look like. You need to cast somebody that looks like this, And so when I go to watch a movie or I'll watch a TV show and I'm like, okay, I know who they need to look like. And then they do it. And for me, it's the biggest disappointment sometimes, because it's like, he has blonde hair. Why would you cast someone with black hair? That is not what he looks like. And so it's funny that you say that, because you can take one book and hand it to 10 different people and then have them draw the main character, and not one single person will have the same image.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so, yeah, I've had an amazing, it's been a great experience to see that art coming back, to see their interpretation of the characters. I think people are going to really love it when they get the chance.
I can't wait to see it, because I know that you told me which scene you were having drawn, but I can't remember.
The first scene that was illustrated by Adrian Rennick is the three men ice fishing together on the ice floe.
Okay.
The second artist is doing character portraits, so it's not specific scenes, but she picked 9 characters from the story.
Sure.
And did portraits of them. And then the third sequence is the arrival of the 3 men at the Oasis.
That's the one that I cannot wait to see that one.
The early drafts of that are spectacular. I'm very, very excited about that.
So how are you going to put those? Are you going to put those on your website?
So they're going to be, all of the Kickstarter backers are receiving them as if they backed at that level or above. So they're going to get those in a bundle later on. And then I think our plan is that we're going to offer a digital book box through my website, which will include not just the character art, but also 3 short stories, some deleted scenes from the book, things like that.
Oh, fun.
Pick up along with a downloadable copy if they want to kind of get a little behind the scenes on a lot of this stuff. So I think that'll be good.
So if you guys haven't seen the cover of this book, it's got a hand with really gnarly looking nails on it, and the top part of it is kind of a pixelated blue. It looks like what you would see if you saw light through ice. And then it kind of fades into like the red and the yellow of like fire. It is one of my favorite book covers.
Oh, I loved it.
But then you've changed it.
So we did an alternate for the special edition. So Matthew Renault, artist in Australia, did the original cover and did just a spectacular job.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I love the cover quite a bit. But I knew I wanted to do a alternate cover for the hardcover when we did the Kickstarter.
So what's that look like now?
So I worked with Melody Stout, an amazing author and artist. She designed a cover that is effectively it's cracked ice with the aqua steel spear on the surface of the book.
Yeah. Okay, I remember you saying that.
And it's tremendous. I mean, she did an astonishing job. And honestly, I credit 100%. I credit that cover with the success of the Kickstarter. Like Mel did just an incredible job. She's a wonderful author, wonderful person, and just one of the most gifted cover designers that I've ever seen. So she's also, we actually just made the agreement. She's designing the cover for Extraction as well.
Oh, yay.
So I'm very excited to work with her on that.
Well, Dietrich, I really appreciate you spending time with me today.
Absolutely.
Talking about your books. I always love talking to you guys because it always just goes in directions that I'm never prepared for it to go.
Absolutely.
But I love that. So thank you so much for hanging out with us today. And for all of you listeners, don't forget to go to thespinebookshop.com to get his copy of Frostbitten, because I promise you it is brilliant and you guys will love it. And you can also find him on social media. If you go to TikTok, you'll see him. He does great videos on TikTok. So,
all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And you guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Spine Bookcast Chronicles of a Bookshop. Until next time, happy reading.